When we talk about Smeller, the machine we have built is the machine to realize and put into the world an art that we call Osmodrama, the art of storytelling and composing time-based compositions of smells and smell sequences, of scents and scent sequences that we can endlessly, not only pushing one button and have one smell, we can program a full program like we do with tracks in music.
It's the opportunity to finally have or finally touch the one sense which is the most important one, but which has also been the one which has been most neglected. Since years and decades we are steered visually as we live.
Why is it the most important one?
Just historically, if you go back, the sense of smell is still how sort of lots of animals obviously detect their environment, how they sort of find guidance through their world. The sense of smell used to be important for us, when there were times when you had to be alert that there could be a fire. You would have to smell that first. There would be, let's say, bad food or rotten food or something which would be poisonous. The nose again sends out the signals for that to warn you. Just to smell if there's some wild animals around who want to eat you. That also would have been down to smell, to detect that early enough so you can run. All these things have been taken away from us because we live in a fairly safe environment. And that's why the sense of smell is still enormously powerful.
Is it dormant, you think?
Sorry?
Is it dormant? It's waiting for
it has been neglected. It's been abandoned by taking, the visual life has taken over. We sit in front of the screen, we see things where we go, yes, okay, we can also hear, but that doesn't help us to survive really. So the sense of smell, which used to be also or still is the most emotional part in our brain, if it comes to senses, has been forgotten about. And this is why this is the first opportunity to actually use sense in a composed environment where you put lots of scents together to create a certain environment in a certain area where scents are obviously detectable but different, and also the opportunity to just press a button and get the smell into the room, also in combination with the other senses then. So doing an opera is a fine thing to do, but it's visual and it's audio. And that's it. You can't touch what they're wearing. You can't smell sort of what they are, what situation they're in, and obviously there's nothing to taste. But so it's all visual. And then
I think that was Wagner's idea to have the Gesamtkunstwerk, which is the total art form, and he wanted to combine what he thought was every possible medium. But I suppose he left smell out because he just didn't think it was a possibility.
Well, so far you couldn't recreate it.
At
first, you can't take the trees and then put it on stage, and then you can't take the water and let it run through the stage so people would smell water. And by doing what we're doing, this is for the first time possible to have a direct influence with smell on the situation and steer it.
If I may ask about the narrative thing, how is, because I haven't experienced Smeller, so I'm just it's like having to guess what music is like, having not heard it would be quite a task.
Yes, but having heard tones in the world and thinking of how it would be when you make art with it.
Yeah, but how does narrative, I'm imagining that composing with smell would be pretty abstract.
Yeah. Abstract doesn't contradict narrative.
Okay.
There can be an abstract narration. You can tell a story not by naming the objects, but by allusions, insinuations, pointers. You point at something. If we have a mix of a scented liquid and a blended scented liquid, we have a certain emotion in it, and that emotion is not clearly depictable. It cannot be exactly named what the ingredients are. It just reminds you of something that you very often cannot say exactly what, but you can feel something. That you can have with certainty, the emotion. But emotional stuff is not things we can literally and clearly talk about. I mean, poetry tries that.
Yeah.
And this is another kind of poetry. Like you differentiate between novels and lyrics.
Yeah.
In lyrics, you do not have to explain much. You insinuate. You have.
The more you leave out, the more poetic it is. So.
Leaving out is a very powerful means of creating poetry.
Yeah.
But this is all sort of an intellectual thing. Poetry, we need to be able to read, to understand.
Yes.
So this is one thing. And this is, I think, where the whole challenge starts. But all of a sudden, there is the chance to have smell in an environment and to press a button and to give to the audience a particular smell.
Yeah.
So this is new. And this is also, I remember we had a talk about, you presented this to somebody who then just said, this doesn't exist.
Yeah.
Which is probably the most stupid comment I've ever heard, especially from sort of art people who should know about, or should be open up. Who should be open enough to allow things actually they haven't seen, because that could be called, this is new.
Yeah.
So, but obviously it doesn't exist that people can imagine that there is smell in a form, in a concentrated form, brought to their noses, and actually not abstract, but being quite specific about what particular smells will reach your nose now.
Yeah.
And then this is one thing, but then imagine you can layer other senses on top of that. So for the first time you have different smells passing by your nose, and then 10 seconds later the smells are gone, and then a new combination of smells of a certain environment is being you're being confronted with. And that is the challenge. And this is also why we're struggling, I think, in terms of people cannot imagine this.
When did it occur to you that you could stop a smell and start a new one? Because that's the main controlling element that separates this from just pumping a smell into a room. How did you know that was
You have to maintain several physical phenomenons and manage them and tackle physical problems to make it possible. One of the most prominent reasons why these so far made attempts of working with smells in cinema, for example, triumphantly failed was because people didn't think that smells don't go away.
Yeah.
Or they thought they can blend smells and then send them through a tube, through a pipe to the public, and then come through the same tube with another smell, which is not possible because the condensations of the first smell will completely mix with the second one, and you never have control about it.
But how do you get the first smell out?
You have to create a certain draft in the room that you don't really feel as a wind.
Okay.
And within that draft, and that is very important, it is not enough to create a draft in the room to transport the smells. This draft has to be whirlpool free. It has to be a laminar, like a piston of an air cake pushing evenly through the room. That is the only possibility how you can control smells. You have to obtain control over the air in the room. I think Osmodrama will bring people closer to their sense of smell and use their nose in daily life. That's what we experienced when we built Smeller. We were anxious we were uncomfortable and a little bit concerned about that we will soon have a swollen, red, numb nose because of being overexposed by smells all the time, sitting in Smeller, tuning the piano, tuning the organ, the smell organ, and then all the time having these different smells, and at the end smelling nothing anymore because you're completely dumped with impressions. The opposite happened. To our great delight, we could see that that the synaptic switches seem to grow fast, proportionally to how often, fast and intensively we are exposing ourselves to smell sequences. And we went out in lunch breaks, left the room, and everybody had this judgmental mode in his smelling and said, did you smell it passing by the tree and coming around the corner? So we were all the time depicting smells, naming them or not naming them, realizing them. You start to realize, to pay attention to something that happens by itself to you all the time, so often and so much that you forgot about it.
So what a revelation, yeah? Only once, all these people sit there in this museum building up this machine, and all of a sudden they're being asked, actually, try and use your nose. And so they started doing that, and then they leave the house, and then, you discover things. It's like an adventure almost. It's like somebody said to you, you've got this thing in the middle of your face, why don't you use it? And all of a sudden everybody does. And it's like reborn, so you discover something on your body which has been forgotten or been told you to not use any longer, because we give you other things. We give you your eyes and your ears. It is an educational thing because lots of people would have probably forgotten smells because they were maybe either never exposed to those smells, or they've been exposed to something a long time ago, and so they've forgotten. But once you've smelled something, it'll be in your brain. So if you smell it again, it will do something with you, because each smell, once you smell it for the first time, is connected to your mood in that situation. So whatever you smell something for the first time in a bad mood, it'll always remind you of this particular bad moment from the past, and vice versa. So
do you think smell might change people's attitudes and relationship to smell in general?
Hopefully, yeah. I think, why not? I mean, whenever we get to show on a documentary, and so we follow a documentary on television, well, you're a bit smarter afterwards, unless you don't follow it. So, yes, of course, it will remind you of certain smells you have smelled before. It'll touch you. It might not even be, it might be sort of a negative moment even created, because there might be a smell you have a negative connotation with.
And
but great,
all the better.
Yeah, exactly. Because this is what I said earlier. We are being driven into completely being able to compose our world and to steer our world the way we want to. Negative things aren't allowed. We put things away on the computer. We delete stuff. And things we don't like, we don't look at. But with a smell, once it's in your nose, it's there. You have detected it. You have to make do with it. So, and then this creates a different situation, and it's a new thing. It's a challenge. It's an education.
The audience for the smeller is quite vulnerable then, because they're just having to. You could be pumping God knows what.
Of course, you have to be smart and refined with the way you compose. We are not sending people to the cinema to blind them. We are not sending people to the concert to make them deaf. We are not sending people into the theater to give them the creeps or to make them getting an epileptic fit in the cinema. No, we are creating art that is sometimes a very refined composition of pleasant and sometimes even less pleasant sensations that make a whole thing. And I think Osmodrama is the way to completely revolutionize our cultural attitude towards smell and smelling and receiving sense with our nose. It's a revolution of the nose in our culture when we think of a machine that for the first time can do what we talk about, can do osmodrama, can do sequences of smells endlessly, telling stories, and imagine all the experiments we can do. The moment we have it somewhere, someplace, or more than one places, that is the even better. As soon as we have two smellers in two different cities, we can, the same thing happens with telephones when you have two telephone machines you can
takes
telephone.
two.
So we have
Perfect.
two smellers, we can exchange whiffs between cities, different ones. We can have terminals where people hang out like in lounges and have scents coming out of the smeller being played by people in other cities
So
and
you could
exchanging.
email a scent score or like a directions for a scent score to another.
Sure,
smell.
you can have olfactory tweets between people and even have boards with electronic time slot displays when which composition by
Right,
whom
yeah.
is being played when. So people can hang out, see what the others do, and then have the one that is addressed to themselves and react. And we can have social networks and display the feedbacks on the smells. That is also a very important thing, that people tell us what they feel, and that helps us reacting with our compositions and enhance certain recipes, enhance certain blendings to a more accurate way of telling that story or that composition we want to play.
One of the most impressive things I always find when I sort of meet people and I talk about smell or fragrance, everybody is interested in wanting to talk about it. People are desperate to talk about it because they never get the chance to do it. And then you can finally feel it. It's an emotional issue to people. So somebody asks the first question, and then people sort of unload their shit upon you because they want to talk about smell, and they never have the chance to. And also because people aren't trained as we are being trained visually over the years and decades when we live. For the first time, they find words, attributes to attach to a certain smell, and they are so happy. So they leave these sort of meetings so happy, and they're so grateful that they've always had this desire to talk about it, but they never could, or they never sort of started a discussion about it because everybody feels uncomfortable about smell, and this is a bit of a guidance, a bit of a tool to open this up and to make people believe that actually, hang on, there is the sense of smell. Let's talk about it. How do you feel about it?
This is a question I have. When film starts and I don't know if they started with a single static camera and people are receiving the information like that, and then throughout time the edits have become more complex and quicker, and you can hold more narratives in your head at one moment. Does smell work like that? How quick can we interpret smell?
I think before we haven't had the machine being made accessible to the public, we cannot prove to many people. We have proven it to ourselves so far, and to a number of nearly 80,000 visitors in the first testing run we have had 2 years ago, that it works. And that the longer you expose yourself to Smeller, the machine that realizes Osmodrama, the more you differentiate between the smells you get and between the rhythms of smells you get and between the order in which you get the smells. It does make a difference to smell rose and then leather and then the dripping scythe, the green cut grass of the dripping scythe, and then leather again, and then a machine oil, or the other way around. It tells you a different story and you don't even know what exactly is it, but it works.
Is counterpoint possible?
Oh yeah, I think it's very much possible. I think this is one of the great chances of Smeller. In this respect, we are right away entering the field of correlations between music and smells. Counterpoint would mean that, for example, you have very pleasant smell and then you have very, very unpleasant smell. You have the scent of decay and death, and on the other hand, you have the smell of newborn life or blossoms or buds, sprouts, fruits, anything.
But can they be detectable? Like you take in one and there are two others come in and then they go. And Is it differentiated?
Of course, we all smell whatever's coming.
Yeah.
You know, we will smell that. The question is, people. So far, people didn't have to be ready for this because it didn't exist. So yes, there are machines where they can blow a scent into the room, and that has been done in lots of large corporations who use fragrances for their service shops or whatever they do. So, but this has also always been one, which is why, yes, so you can have one smell, but there are millions of smells. And so with the machine, we focused on the most important ones to actually recreate the environment we know. So we know how the sea smells, the forest, the cut green grass, leather, things Wolfgang just mentioned. So this is the challenge. It hasn't been there.
Yeah.
People were not yet exposed to these things, and I'm sure it is highly unusual to being exposed to this. And people just so far they don't dare to do that. They're scared.
Yeah.
You know. And then on the other hand, I would see, well, hang on, this is the most important sense we have. It's the most emotional one.
Right.
So it's the one which touches you most. And we are neglecting this? You must be joking.
So it must, in one way, it must feel good that people are completely incredulous and can't imagine that this is true, because it's something just beyond them. So when they do experience it, it will be.
As soon as the thing is there,
Yeah.
and you can tell them, okay, please have a seat and be surprised.
Yeah.
This is what we want to do. Smeller is a machine by which we can paint world, as I would call it. We can paint world. It starts with the deepest tone. Tone is just a metaphor for a key on a keyboard, but you can also play it on a computer and program it for hours and hours. And you can have other interfaces to interact with human actions, entering, moving. You can have motion detectors that trigger certain smell combinations or smells or sequences. But we have this range of a basic set of smells by which you can paint what we call world,
like
quote
the
unquote.
primary colors of smell.
Primary colors, yes, but it's more than primary colors, because smell doesn't work like the light in 8 different frequencies or in RGB as we have it in television.
Yeah.
And it does not work with the tones in the octave, with the overtone series, and with this physical law on which we can rely. It has, viewed from now, quite a chaotic structure to be combined with, because we are talking about chemistry here, and we're talking about particles and not about waves. And there's a different imponderability in certain dynamics of smells. A lot of things are highly experimental. We have to find out what we can do with it, and this process of finding out how we react and how it touches us and what kind of stories we can tell and how far we can go, this is what the machine for the first time makes possible.
Basically, we can put any smells we know and we can smell, we can put into this machine, because unless we can, let's say there are some smells we can't recreate in a beaker, so you have to actually have it, you can take the real stuff, you know.
Okay.
For example, we can't really recreate a proper smell of real fish. But it doesn't matter, because we just take a real fish and put it into the compartment.
That's what we did.
Yeah, we did that, and it worked. So,
and it was very convincing.
So it has to be sort of an old fish.
Yes.
It depends on what you want. But you know, so anything which has a smell which we cannot recreate, we can just take and put it into the compartment, and then use the real smell and blow it out.
How do you record a smell?
Record.
Yeah.
Well, it's as
let's
I
say
said.
let's say there was something that you couldn't physically remove. Could you break down the components and then rebuild it?
Yeah. If there would be something which has a strong smell, a natural strong smell, and it is either, I don't know, a plant or a tree or something you can't move, there's the chance to make a so-called headspace.
Okay.
which gives you all the molecules coming off that particular piece, which smells. So that can be captured, and then we can recreate that. With some of these things, you can recreate it very well. With some, up to a point.
Yeah.
So this is when we come to the point where I say, well, look, you know, we can't really recreate that well as it smells in nature. So let's see if we can just take that piece of nature and put it into the machine.
When we bring Osmodrama to the world and into the cultures by building the machine that can do it, we have good reason for so many artists who deal with smells or will deal with smells. There's not a very articulate art world in smells. This is probably the smallest genre, the smallest place in the senses where art is being made. But when we have Osmodrama in the world, we'll have a good reason for so many people to try harder with the composition of the substances that we set up, our ranges, our complete settings of the instrument, of the smell organ to play on and to play with, and also of the combinations between smells and other arts, to have experiments with theater, with dance, with literature, telling stories accompanied by their smells, or telling stories juxtaposed with counterpoint, contradictory smells to give you this artificial effect of where does it go when you do that.
Yeah.
And we can't do it without the machine. It is unimaginable for me that we haven't built it yet, that no one hadn't had the stamina or the will, the vision or the will to really build that and make it possible. There has been talked about it, there has been written about it. We find these things in literature. We find it in world literature of all ages. There's a smell organ occurring. There's some smell cinema occurring. We have the visions of composers in music composition. Alexander Scriabin had wanted to work with smells. Wagner possibly didn't want to touch it because it was out of his cultural esteem, realm, self-understanding, identity, to have smell something that is inferior
and
to our high, to
sex, anyway.
Yeah.
When I was thinking about having music and smells together, particularly in opera, which is what I do, it was just the simple thought of having it, the smells synchronized to the scene. So if you have an opera set in a painter's studio, then you would presumably have it smelling of oil paint or whatever he's using. Or if you go into a restaurant, then you have the smells of the restaurant, which is, if that works, then that's fantastic. But it would just be an additional atmospheric device in a way, much like setting the scene. But then I was thinking, what if I was to compose the sounds in the way that I'm composing music, in which case maybe the overture for the opera could be purely smells, and then you could have some key scene which exists purely in smells, and not in a way that is referring to the natural world or referring to places that the characters may be in. It might be completely synthetic, but through experimenting you find a way to pull emotions in or create some kind of narrative that makes sense on its own terms.
You mean an overture that is only sense in a complete mute space?
Yeah.
And then comes music?
Yeah. The overture could be completely composed of smell. The same could be true of an interlude, or you could have certain rhythmic elements of the entire piece could be, let's say you had a pulse of a certain odour, and that pulse might not exist musically or might not exist dramatically, but exist in smell. obviously it would take a lot of experimenting to find what works and what's effective, and then you end up having connoisseurs of smell the way you'd have connoisseurs of sound, and everybody reacts completely different ways to it. But
As happens in music.
yeah, exactly. But it just spending a little time thinking about it immediately took me away from having a representational smell that would be synchronized to a scene or a character. And it's, you know, that could work very effectively, but if you take a small leap away from that, then you have a completely fresh and potentially sophisticated way of expressing something completely unique.
I think so too. My situation at the moment, I think, is sometimes as if you have invented the guitar in a world where only noises and sounds were naturally from the environment, and you say, look, this guitar can play different sounds from the environment, and I can put these together on this instrument, synthesize them here, and can put them together to new combinations that are doing new things, completely apart from the environment.
Yeah, the smeller thing seems to be like starting at the other end of musical history, where you'd have one of the more recent developments being musique concrète, where you take sounds from nature and you turn that into musical forms. But you're starting with smeller, taking smells from the natural world. But I'm imagining a completely synthetic, non-referential, non-memory based, or a world of composing in that sense.
The possibilities are endless.
Yeah.
It's just that, but all of a sudden we can do that with that machine as we've seen it, and people they're just not used to it. They never experienced that.
Nor should they be, though.
Yeah, exactly, because it wasn't there. So
it would be strange if everybody said, "Oh, great, we've finally done a smelling machine. I'm sure that works perfectly well." That would be a leap of imagination.